The morning air was cool, fresh, and filled with the soft hum of excited voices gathering near Buckingham Palace. The sky was a calm blue, the kind that made the buildings look brighter, and the trees look greener. People from around the world stood behind the rope barrier, waiting to watch the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Children bounced with excitement, parents lifted their phones to record the moment, and tourists whispered about how beautiful everything looked. Among the crowd stood an elderly man named Arthur Hale. Anyone passing by could see that Arthur wasn't just another visitor. He stood quietly, with a thoughtful posture and a slow, steady gaze that didn't wander the way most tourists' eyes did. His attention remained fixed on the open square, where the guards would soon march. He seemed to ignore the cheerful chatter around him. Instead, his eyes held a mixture of calmness and something deeper, something that felt like a story hidden far inside his heart. Arthur was dressed neatly, with his coat buttoned even though the weather didn't really require it. His silver hair peeked out from beneath a flat cap, and in his hands he held something precious. A small, carefully folded military cap, and a simple black case, polished enough to show faint reflections. Anyone who looked closer would notice how gently he held them, almost as if they were fragile treasures. His steps had been slow as he walked to the palace, and there was a slight limp in his movement. But even with that, he stood tall, with a quiet pride that suggested he wasn't used to asking for help. His eyes were warm but tired, as if they had witnessed more than anyone could guess from his calm expression. He wasn't there for pictures, and he wasn't there for entertainment. He had come for something more personal. As the crowd filled in around him, Arthur didn't push forward or try to step ahead to get a better view. He simply stood at the rope line, his hands gently gripping the top of it, patiently waiting. The military cap and medal case rested against his chest like reminders of a time he had lived long ago. A little boy nearby looked up at him with curiosity. "Are you a soldier?" the boy asked softly, tugging at his mother's hand. Arthur smiled, a soft, polite smile. The boy nodded, as if he understood something important, even though he didn't. His mother gave Arthur a kind smile before turning her attention back to the square. Just a few feet away, in the center of all the activity, a young royal guard named Corporal James Whitmore stood in his position. His uniform looked perfect. His stance was straight and disciplined, and his face stayed focused, as royal guards were trained to do. Even while surrounded by hundreds of people, James didn't show any reaction. His eyes looked forward, steady and calm, but James had learned to observe without looking like he was observing. Years of training had taught him how to notice things in his surroundings while still appearing still as a statue. And for a moment, his eyes without turning caught a glimpse of Arthur standing near the rope line. Arthur wasn't doing anything unusual. He wasn't waving, he wasn't talking loudly, and he wasn't trying to get anyone's attention. And maybe that was what made him stand out. Most people around the palace were smiling, excited, eager to capture every moment on camera. But Arthur seemed quieter, more thoughtful, as if he were remembering something important. James didn't break discipline. He didn't move or change his expression. But inside his mind, he wondered who the elderly man was and why he held a military cap and a medal case so close to his chest. The young guard had always respected the older generation of servicemen. Even without speaking, he could sense that Arthur carried a story with him, one that mattered deeply. The palace courtyard began to shift with movement. The marching band prepared in the distance, tuning their instruments. The guards stood ready to step forward in perfect formation. There was a gentle energy of anticipation in the air, like the first moment before a grand event begins. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting for the ceremony to start. Arthur exhaled slowly, his breath steady but carrying a hint of heaviness. He closed his eyes for a brief second, listening to the sound of the band warming up. A single trumpet note drifted through the air, clear and bright, and something in Arthur's expression softened. It was as if the sound unlocked a memory he had carried quietly for years. People around him chatted, unaware of the emotional weight settling in Arthur's heart. He wasn't thinking about the crowd, or the palace, or even the ceremony that was about to begin. His mind drifted somewhere else, someplace far away. Back to a time when he was young, dressed in a uniform, standing with friends who felt more like family. He remembered early mornings, shared laughter, long walks, tired evenings, and the feeling of belonging to something greater than himself. Those memories came back softly, like warm light shining through a window. But along with them came moments that were hard to think about, moments he had tucked away gently over the years. As he opened his eyes, a familiar melody began to play from the marching band. The tune wasn't the full version yet, just the early notes, but Arthur recognized it immediately. His breath caught in his chest, and his fingers tightened around the metal case. It was a tune that held meaning for him, one that connected him directly to people and moments he would never forget. The music hadn't even fully begun, but Arthur's eyes glistened slightly, not with sadness alone, but with something deeper, a mixture of honor, memory, pride, and the quiet ache of time passing. James, standing perfectly still in his position, noticed the slight change in Arthur's expression. He couldn't move to help or speak to him, but he felt something shift inside him. Something about the elderly man's presence felt different from the cheerful excitement of the crowd. Though neither of them spoke, though they stood several feet apart, a quiet understanding formed between the young guard and the older veteran. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words, one based on respect, experience, and an invisible thread of shared duty across generations. The music grew a little louder. The guards prepared to march. The ceremony was moments away from beginning. And as the crowd leaned forward in excitement, and cameras lifted into the air, Arthur Hale stood still, holding the memories of a lifetime in his hands. His presence was calm, but his heart began to stir, sensing that this ceremony would mean more to him than he had expected. Little did he know, across the courtyard, Corporal James Whitmore had noticed him, and that simple awareness would soon lead to a moment no one in the crowd would ever forget. As the gentle music drifted through the fresh morning air, Arthur Hale stood quietly among the crowd, feeling as if the world around him had slowly begun to fade. The soft notes coming from the marching band reached him one by one, almost like small taps on the door of his memory. Each note carried a warmth, a softness, and a familiar rhythm that pulled him back into moments he thought he had tucked away long ago. The music continued, growing a little stronger, a little clearer, and with every rise and fall of the melody, Arthur felt something inside him shift. His heartbeat softened in his chest. His hands, which had been steady a moment before, now trembled just the slightest bit. He held his metal case close, almost as if it were a source of comfort, something to hold on to while the wave of memories washed over him. People around him didn't notice at first. They were too busy watching the guards march into position, or adjusting their cameras for a perfect shot. Children laughed, families chatted, and phones clicked constantly. The ceremony had begun to unfold in front of them, colorful and grand, filled with music and movement. But Arthur heard nothing except the tune that had once meant so much to him. The band moved into the next section of the song, and suddenly the melody became unmistakable. Arthur's breath hitched. His shoulders tensed gently. His eyes, which had been watching the guards, now lowered to the ground for a moment as if he needed a second to gather himself. It was the same tune his old regiment used to play during special gatherings, moments of reflection, moments of connection, moments where everyone stood together and felt like one single unit. It was a song filled with memories, a song that had wrapped itself around his heart many years ago. Arthur blinked several times, but the wetness in his eyes only increased. He wasn't sad. Not in a painful way. It was more like something inside him had finally been touched after staying silent for years. It was warmth mixed with longing, gratitude mixed with quiet sorrow. It was the feeling of remembering people who had been a part of his life, people who had shaped him, supported him, laughed with him, and stood beside him. He whispered a name under his breath, a name he had not spoken aloud in a long time. His voice was soft, barely a breath, but that one name held an entire world of memories. A woman standing beside him glanced over, noticing his trembling hands. She touched her husband's arm and gave Arthur a thoughtful look. The husband looked too, puzzled at first, then softened when he realized the old man was experiencing something deeper than a simple ceremony. Arthur tried to steady his breathing, but the melody continued, each note stirring a different memory, some warm, some bittersweet. He remembered long days spent training with his group, evenings filled with shared jokes, smiles, and the sense that every person standing with him was more like a brother than a stranger. He remembered how proud he was to be part of something meaningful, something that felt important and larger than anything he had ever done before. He remembered early mornings when the sun wasn't even up, yet everyone was awake, standing in a line, voices calm, spirits strong. He remembered the way they supported each other, the way someone always had a helpful word or a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't just a team. It was a family created through shared purpose and shared days. As the memory unfolded in his mind, Arthur gently brushed a thumb over the metal case. Inside it lay a simple medal, polished carefully earlier that morning. He hadn't brought it to show off. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He had brought it because it reminded him of the people he once shared his life with. People who had encouraged him, inspired him, and walked beside him through challenges and triumphs. The music swelled again, and Arthur couldn't hold back anymore. The first tear slipped quietly down his cheek. Then another. He didn't try to wipe them away. He didn't feel embarrassed. His heart felt full. And sometimes, fullness comes with tears, gentle tears, soft and warm, the kind that carry love rather than pain. A few tourists nearby turned their heads toward him. They didn't say anything, but their faces softened when they saw the expression on his face. They could sense that this moment meant something deeply personal to him. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed to Arthur. Her mother gently placed a finger to her own lips, silently asking her to be quiet out of respect. The girl nodded, watching Arthur with innocent curiosity. Arthur's lips trembled as he whispered another name. This time, a tiny sigh escaped him. His shoulders rose as he inhaled shakily, then dropped again as he exhaled. His entire body seemed to fold inward, as though he were trying to protect the tender memory blooming inside him. Across the courtyard, Corporal James Whitmore stood in perfect formation, eyes focused forward. His posture was straight, unmoving, dignified. To anyone watching, he looked like a complete symbol of discipline. But James had trained himself to notice even the smallest changes in the environment without appearing to look around. He saw the old man's hands tremble. He saw the slight bow of Arthur's head. He saw the glimmer of tears. James felt something shift inside him. He didn't know Arthur. He didn't know what the melody meant to him. But he could tell that this was not a moment of distress. It was a moment of heart-deep memory, something meaningful and tender, something that should not go unnoticed. Yet James could not move. He could not turn his head. He could not break formation. His duty demanded that he stay perfectly still, fully focused, entirely committed to every rule and expectation placed upon him. Still, as the band played, James felt a quiet ache of empathy spreading through him. He wished he could step forward, speak to the old man, or even offer a gentle nod of understanding. But the uniform he wore came with responsibilities he could not ignore. The band reached a quieter section of the melody, one that felt more like a whisper than a song. Arthur placed his military cap over his heart. His hands shook a little more now. His eyes were wet, shining under the soft rays of sunlight. A few tourists near Arthur stood silently now, their excitement gently replaced with respect. The noise in that small section of the crowd grew softer, as if everyone instinctively sensed that something meaningful was happening beside them. Arthur took a slow breath, then another, trying to steady himself. But memories have a way of flowing in gently once they begin. He remembered long conversations with friends he once considered family, shared smiles under the open sky, stories told late at night, and promises made with sincerity and hope. He held all those moments inside him, allowing them to shine brightly for the first time in years. The music reached another familiar part, and Arthur whispered a soft, "Thank you," though no one could say if he was speaking to the people in his memories, to the band, or simply to the beautiful moment unfolding around him. His tears continued to fall gentle, steady, meaningful. If anyone looked closely at the young guard standing across the courtyard, they might notice something subtle, a deepening in his gaze, a warmth that wasn't usually seen in the face of a royal guard. James felt the moment tug at his heart, and although he couldn't speak or move, his thoughts were clear. This man mattered. His story mattered. And this moment, right here in the middle of a large crowd, would become a turning point neither of them expected. The melody played on, soft and beautiful, wrapping around Arthur like a gentle embrace from a time long past. He stood there, quietly crying, not from pain but from the power of memory and the deep, silent love he carried for the people who had shaped his life. The world around him kept moving, but Arthur's world stood still, held tenderly by the music and the memories it brought to life. The music floated gently through the palace courtyard, surrounding everyone with its warm, steady rhythm. The guards continued their graceful movements, stepping in perfect formation. Each tap of their polished shoes echoed softly on the stone ground, creating a beautiful pattern of sound and motion. Tourists admired the ceremony with excitement, but in one small corner of the crowd, the air felt different, filled with emotion instead of celebration. Arthur Hale still stood near the rope line, his eyes shining with tears as memories filled his heart. His hands trembled slightly as he held his military cap close to his chest. The melody carried him back through time, reminding him of meaningful connections and moments cherished deeply within him. Across the courtyard, Corporal James Whitmore remained in his designated position, as still and steady as every guard around him. His posture was flawless. His eyes looked forward with unwavering focus. To anyone watching, he appeared to be the perfect example of discipline and training. But inside his mind, something very human and very warm stirred. James noticed everything, even though he could not turn his head or break his straight posture. He saw the way Arthur's shoulders shook gently. He saw the way the old man pressed his lips together as if he was trying his best to stay composed. He saw the quiet sadness mixed with gratitude in the way Arthur blinked away the tears. The young guard felt a sense of concern bloom inside him. Gentle concern. The kind that comes from heart and respect. He didn't know the man's story, but he knew he was witnessing something deeply personal, something that touched the spirit, not just the eyes. James felt a tightness in his throat. It wasn't fear or nervousness. It was empathy. Simple, sincere empathy. He wanted to step forward, walk over to the elderly man, and offer a kind word or a gesture of reassurance. He wished he could say something comforting, something that would let Arthur know he wasn't alone in that moment. But he couldn't. Guards were trained to stay still, to hold their positions, to follow protocol with absolute commitment. He knew that better than anyone. He had trained for years to reach this level of discipline, and yet, standing there, he felt the rules tugging against something inside him, something that told him kindness mattered just as much as discipline. The band shifted into a different section of the song, and Arthur's shoulders dropped slightly, as though he had exhaled a breath he had been holding for far too long. His eyes glistened as he looked at the palace courtyard, remembering the past with each gentle note. Nearby, other tourists began to notice Arthur's emotional expression. A few of them paused their filming. Some exchanged soft looks, understanding the weight of the moment, even without knowing the story behind it. A couple standing behind Arthur stepped back slightly to give him a little more space. It was a small gesture, but a kind one. Arthur whispered another quiet name under his breath. His voice shook just a little. His eyes filled again, and a soft tear rolled down his cheek. His hands tightened around the metal case as if the memory had suddenly become too big to contain. And that was the moment James felt something inside himself change. The young guard stood perfectly still and yet felt as if he were moving emotionally, silently, thoughtfully. His breath deepened slightly. His heart beat a little stronger. A gentle pull, almost like a signal, rose inside him. He could not stand there and do nothing. The ceremony continued around him, the band played, the other guards moved gracefully. The crowd watched, but to James, everything suddenly faded into the background. His attention went completely toward the elderly man, standing alone with tears on his cheeks. His mind raced, searching for the right thing to do. He knew the rules of his position. Guards were not supposed to break formation. Not for anything small. Not even for personal moments they witnessed among the crowd. They were meant to stay strong and silent, keeping the ceremony running without interruptions. But James also knew the importance of empathy. The kind of empathy that could bring comfort to someone in need. The kind that didn't require words, but only a gentle action, a quiet sign of understanding. The young guard felt the weight of both responsibilities pressing against each other, duty on one side, compassion on the other. For a few moments, he stood frozen in the middle of this silent battle within himself. Then, very slowly, very carefully, James made a decision. He took a breath, steady and calm, gathering his courage. He waited until a small pause in the formation allowed a moment where he wouldn't disrupt the ceremony dramatically. The timing had to be perfect. He waited, watched from the corner of his vision, and finally, when the music transitioned smoothly into its next gentle passage, he moved. It was a single step, but it felt like the weight of the world had shifted when he took it. The crowd gasped. The sound was small at first, a ripple, like a wave beginning to form. A few people turned their heads quickly, unsure of what they had just seen. Others widened their eyes, surprised that a royal guard, known for their strict discipline, had moved out of formation at all. James took another step. Calm, purposeful, respectful. He still held the posture of a guard, straight back, calm face, steady movement. But his direction had changed. He was walking toward Arthur Hale. Arthur didn't notice at first. His eyes were lowered, focused on the memories filling his heart. He thought the world around him had faded into the background. He didn't expect anyone to come to him. He didn't expect anyone to understand why he felt the way he did. As James approached, the band continued its music. Unaware of the quiet moment, unfolding between two people, on opposite sides of a lifetime of experience. A few people in the crowd raised their hands to their mouths. Some whispered, surprised, yet touched. Cameras lowered, as the atmosphere shifted. The moment no longer felt like a public event, it felt intimate, sacred, and profound. James stopped just a few steps away from Arthur. Arthur finally looked up, sensing someone near him. His eyes lifted slowly, still shining with tears, and when he saw the royal guard standing so close, his lips parted in surprise. He wasn't sure what to think. He wasn't sure if he had done something wrong, or if he was simply imagining the situation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to grow quieter, even though the music continued. Then, in a soft, gentle voice, barely above a whisper, James asked, "Are you all right, sir?" Arthur blinked, startled not by the question, but by the kindness in the young man's tone. He looked into James's eyes and saw sincerity, respect, and something even more meaningful, genuine care. Arthur opened his mouth to answer, but the emotion in his chest rose so suddenly that no words came out. His throat tightened. His hands shook again. He lowered his gaze for a moment, trying to gather himself. James waited patiently, his posture still formal, yet softened by compassion. After a few seconds, Arthur managed to speak, though his voice wavered gently. "It's the music," he whispered. "It brings back memories." James nodded slowly. "Good memories?" he asked softly. Arthur's eyes shone brighter. "Very good memories," he breathed. "And very important ones." James didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. A silent reassurance that the older man didn't have to stand there alone with his emotions. For the first time that morning, Arthur felt truly seen. The guard wasn't simply following duty. He was offering something from the heart: kindness, understanding, and quiet support. The music continued around them, but the moment between them stood apart, gentle, sincere, unforgettable. And although neither of them knew it yet, this simple act of compassion would soon become a moment that touched the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The music continued to fill the courtyard as Arthur and Corporal James Whitmore stood only a few steps apart. The crowd around them seemed to fade into a soft blur, as though the world had paused to give space to this quiet, heartfelt moment. Even though the ceremony went on, the gentle connection between the elderly veteran and the young guard had become the center of attention for many standing nearby. Arthur took a slow breath, feeling a mixture of surprise and comfort. He had never expected anyone, especially a royal guard, to step out of formation and come to him. It felt unreal, almost like a memory blending with the present. His eyes still held traces of tears, but his heart began to feel lighter, as if the warmth of kindness had softened the heavy emotion inside him. James stood before him with a respectful posture, his expression calm and compassionate. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his presence strong, yet his eyes held a gentle softness that wasn't usually seen on the face of a soldier standing on duty. He had broken protocol, but he had done it for a reason that felt deeply right. Arthur looked down at the metal case in his hands, holding it as if it were a fragile piece of his heart. He took another breath, steadying himself before speaking again. "That song," Arthur whispered softly. "It was a tune we used to hear often. It meant a lot to us." James listened intently. He didn't rush him or push him to say more. Instead, he allowed Arthur's words to come naturally, without interruption. His stillness wasn't cold or rigid. It was patient and respectful, as though he knew that this moment needed gentleness. Arthur continued, "A dear friend of mine, someone very close, loved that tune. He used to hum it every morning, even when the days were long and tiring." His voice shook very slightly, not from pain, but from the strength of the memory. Hearing it today just brought everything back. James nodded softly, understanding without needing the full details. He knew what memories could do, how they could bring warmth and ache at the same time. He sensed that Arthur needed space to speak, to breathe, to be acknowledged. Around them, the crowd grew quiet. People lowered their phones, realizing that capturing the moment on camera felt unnecessary compared to witnessing the sincerity happening in front of them. The cheerful whispers faded into soft silence. The energy of the courtyard shifted into something tender, respectful, and deeply human. A woman nearby wiped her eyes. A man placed a gentle hand on his partner's shoulder. A child watched quietly, sensing that this was not a moment for laughter, but for understanding. Arthur looked up again, meeting James's eyes. "I miss him," he said in a soft, trembling voice. "He was like a brother to me." James felt a deep wave of empathy wash through him. Though he was trained to stay composed, he couldn't help the slight warmth that filled his chest. He wished he could offer a hug or place a hand on Arthur's shoulder, but even stepping out of formation had already stretched the boundaries of what he was allowed to do. Still, he wanted to offer something meaningful, something respectful. So he did what he could. Very slowly, with complete sincerity, James straightened his posture even more and stepped back half a pace. Then, with full discipline and deep respect, he raised his right hand and performed a solemn salute, one that wasn't part of the ceremony, one that wasn't meant for public display. It was a salute from the heart. A salute meant for honor. A salute reserved for true respect. The crowd froze. A wave of emotion spread through them like a soft breeze. Everyone understood instantly that this gesture meant far more than any scripted performance. It was personal, gentle, and full of gratitude. Arthur's breath caught. His eyes widened, not in shock, but in deep, overwhelming appreciation. He recognized the meaning behind the salute. He knew what it represented. Not just recognition of his service, but recognition of the memories he held close. Recognition of the connection he shared with those from his past. Recognition of the silent strength he carried. His hands shook slightly as he clutched the metal case. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." James lowered his hand with the same grace he had raised it, his expression soft but steady. He had done what he felt was right, not because he was told to, not because it was part of any ceremony, but because kindness sometimes needed to stand above rules. The band, unaware of the emotional moment, continued their music. But the tone of the courtyard felt completely transformed. People watched James and Arthur with glistening eyes, touched by the simple beauty of compassion. Then something gentle and unexpected happened. The bandmaster, positioned further back, caught sight of the guard's unusual movement. He looked toward James and then followed his line of sight to Arthur, an elderly man clutching a metal case with misty eyes. The bandmaster couldn't hear the words exchanged, but he understood enough by seeing the expression on Arthur's face and the guard's respectful salute. Without causing any disruption, the bandmaster raised his hand discreetly and signaled the musicians. It was a small cue, subtle enough that only trained eyes would notice it. The band gracefully shifted into another musical piece, one with a deeper, more thoughtful melody. And then it happened. The band began to play the full version of the tune Arthur's regiment used to cherish. The melody rose beautifully, dancing through the air like a gentle embrace. It was richer, fuller, and more emotional than before. The notes carried warmth and remembrance, and they wrapped around Arthur like a soft blanket of memories. Arthur gasped softly as he realized what he was hearing. His hand moved to his mouth, covering a trembling smile mixed with quiet tears. The tune filled his heart completely, touching every corner of his memory. James looked at the band with grateful eyes before turning back to Arthur. The moment had become larger than both of them. It wasn't only about one guard noticing an elderly man. It was about the entire ceremony transforming into a tribute gentle, respectful, and sincere. The crowd felt it too. Some held their breath. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some simply stood very still, letting the music settle into their hearts. Arthur felt as though all the years between then and now had softened. He felt connected again to his past, to his memories, to the people he had cherished. The music reminded him that nothing meaningful is ever truly lost. It lives inside the heart, waiting for moments like this to shine again. He whispered the name of his dear friend once more. But this time, there was peace in his voice instead of sorrow. James watched him gently, feeling humbled to be part of a moment so tender. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. As the final notes of the tune echoed into the courtyard, fading slowly into the fresh morning air, Arthur felt lighter than he had in years. His heart felt full, honored, and finally understood. The young guard had broken protocol that day, but in doing so, he had created a moment of pure humanity, one that would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it, and by Arthur Hale most of all. The last gentle notes of the band's music drifted into the morning air, fading softly like a warm memory settling into the heart. Arthur Hale stood still, holding his metal case close to his chest. His eyes shone with quiet emotion. But for the first time in a long while, The tears on his face were not heavy. They were peaceful, grateful, and filled with warmth. Corporal James Whitmore remained standing a few steps in front of him, his posture still straight and respectful. Even though the ceremony continued behind them, and the guards carried out their practiced movements, this small space between Arthur and James felt like a world of its own, a world held together by understanding, kindness, and gentle human connection. Arthur breathed slowly, letting the moment settle inside him. He looked at James with deep appreciation, knowing that this young guard had given him something he hadn't expected to find today. A moment of recognition and kindness that touched the very center of his heart. "You didn't have to do that," Arthur whispered softly. James responded with a calm, sincere tone. "It felt right, sir." Something about those words made Arthur's smile deepen. He nodded slowly, trying to put into words the feelings he carried. But sometimes emotions were too big for simple sentences. Instead, he let his gentle smile speak for him. The crowd around them grew silent once again, not because someone asked them to, but because they could feel the meaning of the moment. People watched with warm, tender expressions. Many had tears in their eyes, though they tried to hide them by wiping their faces quickly or pretending to adjust their glasses. The atmosphere was soft and respectful, as though everyone understood they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. As the ceremony came to an end, the guards returned to their positions to prepare for the final march. James knew he would soon have to return to formation, but he didn't rush. He gave Arthur one last respectful nod, silently asking if he was okay. Arthur nodded back. "Thank you," he whispered again. Today will stay with me." James offered him a small, warm smile, not too big to break protocol, but big enough to show genuine emotion. Then, he gently stepped back into place. His movements were smooth and controlled, returning to discipline with grace. The other guards made room for him without a single sign of judgment. Even though royal guards were known for their strictness, every one of them had seen the moment unfold. They understood. Some of them even admired James quietly for what he had done. After all, kindness was something that didn't break respect, it strengthened it. When James returned to formation, the ceremony continued naturally. The guards marched with dignity, the band played their final notes, and the palace courtyard returned to its usual rhythm. But the energy in the air had changed. It felt softer, brighter, touched by something good. Arthur stood for a moment, watching James walk away. His heart swelled with gratitude. He wiped the last tear from his cheek and breathed deeply, letting the cool air settle around him. He placed his military cap gently back into his bag, as if placing the memory into a safe space. A few tourists approached him with gentle smiles, not to ask questions, not to crowd him, but simply to offer a warm look of support. One woman quietly said, "That was beautiful." Arthur nodded back, appreciating the respect. A young couple stepped forward. The man said softly, "You must have been someone very special to your group." Arthur smiled and replied, "We were all special to each other." The couple nodded with understanding and moved away, leaving Arthur with space and calmness. He appreciated that people were kind without being overwhelming. After the ceremony ended, a palace staff member approached Arthur and invited him to a quieter area where he could sit comfortably. Arthur thanked him and followed slowly, still feeling the heavy emotion gently fading into peaceful warmth. He sat on a simple bench under a tree, where the breeze brushed through the leaves and the sunlight danced softly on the ground. The peaceful setting felt perfect for reflection. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps. He looked up and saw James walking toward him, still in uniform, but now free from the strictness of ceremony. His steps were natural, relaxed, and full of sincerity. Arthur smiled brightly. This time, the smile didn't shake or tremble. It came from a calmer place in his heart. James sat beside him, not too close, but close enough to show comfort. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply shared the quiet space, letting the cool air wrap around them. Finally, James asked gently. Arthur nodded. Better than all right, he said. I didn't expect today to mean so much. James listened carefully, giving Arthur his full attention. Arthur took a breath and continued. Sometimes memories feel heavy, but today they felt warm. You helped with that. James shook his head softly. I only did what anyone should do. Arthur chuckled lightly. Not everyone would have stepped out of formation. James lowered his gaze in a shy, humble way. Maybe. But you reminded me that rules and kindness can live together if we choose the right moment. Arthur's eyes softened with admiration. You're a good man, son. James smiled, touched by the simple compliment. Thank you, sir. They sat quietly for a while, sharing the peaceful morning. People passed by, some smiling at them, some giving James approving nods, others simply admiring the beautiful atmosphere of kindness that still lingered around them. Farther away, tourists who had filmed the moment earlier began sharing the short clips online. They wrote captions like, "The kindest guard I've ever seen," and "This moment made everyone cry," and "Compassion is still alive." The videos spread quickly, reaching thousands of screens within minutes. But Arthur and James didn't know any of that yet. They were simply two people sharing a quiet moment. A palace staff member approached them again and offered Arthur a warm drink. Arthur accepted it gratefully. He held the cup between his hands, letting the gentle warmth soothe his fingers. James leaned back against the bench and said quietly, "You must have many stories, sir." Arthur smiled softly. "I do. And today reminded me that the good ones never really fade." James looked thoughtful, then said, "Your friend would be proud of you." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment and nodded. "I hope so." They fell silent again. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one, filled with understanding, memory, and quiet respect. After some time, Arthur stood slowly. James immediately rose too, offering a steadying hand if needed. Arthur accepted the gesture with a grateful expression. "I should go," Arthur said softly. "I have a long journey home." James nodded. "I'm honored I could meet you today." Arthur smiled warmly. "The honor is mine." Before leaving, Arthur placed his hand gently on James's arm. "Thank you for seeing me." James replied in a soft, sincere voice. "Thank you for reminding me what true honor looks like." Arthur walked away slowly. But this time, his steps were lighter, his shoulders straighter, his heart fuller. As he made his way through the courtyard, people smiled at him, acknowledging him quietly, and he smiled back, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. James watched him go, feeling proud, humbled, and grateful for the moment fate had given them. Hours later, when James finally returned home, he discovered that the entire world had seen what he did. Millions watched the video. People sent messages of love and appreciation. Some said they cried. Some said they felt inspired. Some said they were reminded of the kindness that still exists in the world. James read the messages quietly, feeling a gentle warmth in his chest. But he didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself simply as a person who chose kindness. And somewhere in a small, cozy house miles away, Arthur Hale sat in his armchair with his medal case on the table beside him. He looked at it with a peaceful smile and whispered, "You're still remembered, my friend." It wasn't a sad whisper. It was full of love. Arthur leaned back, closed his eyes, and felt the quiet beauty of the day wrapping around him like a warm blanket. A royal guard had broken protocol. A veteran had felt seen. A moment of kindness had touched the world. And both of their lives had been gently changed forever.